It is October 3rd. This is ESM 105. Thank you all for making it. The camera can't see, so yeah, that's like 45 people here for sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's a room, there's people standing in the lanes and everything. Wow. No, quiet down, everybody. Relax. Everybody knows about ESM 105. You gotta make it to the Friday 9 a.m. lecture. It's the best time on campus. All right? Sick. So for week 7, folks, you've got a quiz 3 coming up. Quiz 3 will cover the week 5 through 6 material. We're gonna probably wrap that 5 through 6 PowerPoint up today. It might go through Monday. But we're doing great. We're on track with everything. Keep working on your annotated bibliography and keep participating in the weekly discussions. And that's it. Yep. If you have annotated bibliography questions, feel free to drop by my office hours. I'm happy to help you out. Answer any questions you've got. Cool. We're going to jump back into week 5 through 6 PowerPoint. For those of you watching the video, we are on slide 34 with the thermal vent community, with the tube worms. Okay, so all of this was just to indicate, hey, some communities, I'll keep it simple. Some communities get their energy from different places, but the primary productivity concept, super important. Usually we think about terrestrial biomes and photosynthesis driving all of the biological production, but that's not necessarily always the case. Okay, cool. We have talked now about terrestrial, we've talked about marine, now let's talk about coastal, okay? The coastal biomes is kind of like an extension of something that we'll talk about again later, but the edge effect, okay? Remember that in any range, in any area, especially in any like community type, forest type, biome type, the margins experience very different conditions than the interior, all right? So similar thing if we're talking about the coast, okay? Coasts have different conditions than either the ocean or the center of the body of land. Fair enough? Coasts also have different topographies due to the generation of the continents and the movement of plates and all this cool stuff. But anyways, let's talk about some important coastal zones. Alrighty, sound good. So, we talked about those marine zones where we were talking about biological productivity and also the substrate stability. Often you'll be characterizing coastal zones, okay, with depth, light, temperature, nutrient concentration. These are the important factors that are going to determine the community composition. All right, so coral reefs, you know a little bit about coral reefs, symbiotic relationship between these polyps and algae. They carry out photosynthesis through the symbiotic organism. There's a mutualistic relationship because the polyp generates this hard barnacle-like structure. It's not really barnacle-like, but they build up this hard calcium-rich structure, okay, where that provides protection and all of these great things. Solid. Gotta be in shallow water because they need light. They're economically important due to tourism is one point that's brought up a lot about coral reefs. Ecotourism will come up later in our economics section, our 1 week on like ecological economics. And what a lot of that ends up boiling down to is to carry out conservation, sometimes we apply an economic value to nature itself and just say, oh, well, the coral reefs are valuable because they bring tourists who spend money. So it can entirely pulled out from their important role in these stable communities and in, there's so much important stuff about coral reefs, but there's always a big point brought up about them. Okay, great. Mangroves. Okay, mangroves. Let's get a cool picture. Picture of mangroves? No picture of mangroves. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. It's because I was trying to move faster when I built this PowerPoint. I remember now. It's like, no time for pictures of mangroves. Okay, so mangroves grow in salt water. They got trees in them commonly that are useful or used to growing in saltwater. They have all sorts of cool adaptations for their roots. In coastal regions, you get water coming off of the coast. You get water that's very salty. Sometimes you get some mixture of salinity. Sometimes roots will like grow up into the air to get access to extra oxygen. All right, really interesting adaptations, structural adaptations, because plants don't always do great growing just soaking in water. It depends on the plant type. All right, mangroves are important as habitat. Mangroves are important for stabilizing the shoreline. All right, plant roots are great at stabilizing soil, improving soil stability. Okay, and they are also commonly harvested. So mangroves can be harvested, cut down for timber. All right, yes?
You answered my question.
I love it. Sick.
I was going to ask if they were used for timber at all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if there's a source of wood, people are going to cut it down and use it for timber. Okay, I'm really excited to get into our freshwater environments. Absolutely excited for our freshwater environments. Now, tidal environments are environments that are affected by the tide. Okay, cool. So you've got this, what I mentioned before, of this mixture of freshwater and this mixture of saltwater, but it's more intense and there's more variability in the salinity of the water than in something like a coastal community like a mangrove, where the ambient salinity level is probably relatively constant. Okay, so estuaries. A river enters the ocean, so you've got a mixture of fresh water from the river and the salt water. We use the term brackish water being it's got some degree of salinity. You find it all the time. You got it over there in the big lagoon. The lagoons get brackish water. If you ever go over there to that area, you might know about there's a sandbar that breaks every once in a while and salt water flushes in. It's a really cool system for study because from year to year, the salinity of that body of water adjusts. So there's a freshwater input into an overall saline or high salinity body of water. Cool? Good deal? Awesome. Okay. Salt marshes and estuaries. So we've got the estuaries there. These are the places where the rivers are flowing into the ocean. We've got the salt marshes. These are wetlands, which we're going to define and talk about some different types of wetlands in a minute, that get regularly flooded. Okay? They have a lot of diversity, and many people will attribute that to the variability in the environment over time and the variability in disturbance intensity. So from year to year, if you go to an estuary or a salt marsh, based on how the salinity's changed, the community can change drastically. It's cool stuff. Okay? I love it. I love it. Let's get into freshwater ecosystems. I'm super excited about this because we had to talk about eutrophication, which is always really important to hear about. Okay. Yes, please.
I don't know if we went over this at all, but what determines whether a body of, is it the size or is it what determines whether a body of water is salty? How does that happen?
Oh, okay, yeah. So you have freshwater inputs you think about, when you evaporate water up, you do distillation, right? You get fresh water. The rainwater's relatively fresh, okay? It's a question of how long has it been in contact with soil, how long has it moved through soil, okay, where it'll pick up dissolved ions, okay? And then everything's concentrated in the standing body of water of the ocean, where water's evaporating, but the ions stay. Kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. How long ago was it rain? That's one way to think about it. Okay, cool. So we've got some standard issue prefaces. All right. Epi means on top. Hypo means below. All right. So the epilimnion is the upper layer of a lake. The hypolimnion is the deeper layer of the lake. Okay. Hot things rise, cold things settle. So a lake ecosystem tends to have a cold layer and a warm layer, and it doesn't have the same degree of movement and churning that the oceans have. So everything's not always cycling up throughout the lake. So there's this region called the thermocline, which can exist in marine environments as well, okay, where the low-density warmer water sits on top of the high-density colder water, okay? So if this thermocline gets disturbed, the water can mix. It's pretty interesting. It's a big plot point in The Meg. If you watch that movie, they talk about how the megalodon lives in the hypolimnion. Well, it's not a limnion because it's the ocean, but it lives below the thermocline where it's colder. And they disturb the thermocline, and it comes out, and then it attacks Jason Statham, and it's a terrible thing. Okay, good stuff. So this leads to two separate zones of lakes, colder, warmer, layer in between them, separating them. It's all physics laying out this. Then you got the benthos, the bottom region of the lake, just like the benthic zone on the marine environments. Here's a diagram of it, all right? And look, that same term as well, littoral zone, where there's plant matter from the terrestrial environment sort of being input, okay? So here we are in the open water, the epilimnion, the thermocline, and the hypolimnion, and there's the benthos, all right? Check it out. Light and oxygen levels are higher up higher, and they're lower down lower. Reasonable enough, I know, it's mind-blowing. Try to think of a mnemonic for that. It's so difficult, okay? So check it out. We talk about eutrophication, and usually in ecology classes, ESM classes, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, have taken, I was always taught eutrophication happens when you have excess nutrients that flow into a body of water, and then it becomes anoxic because there's too much growth and too much decomposition, and it's this really cool process. It's not cool, it's terrible for the lake. It kind of kills the lake, right? But eutrophication is also a natural process that it's just the tendency of lakes. Lakes go through these ages, right? A young, newly formed lake is what we call oligotrophic. And people in ecology will use the term oligotrophic versus eutrophic versus mesotrophic to describe the health of a body of water. They'll say, oh, they'll even say like the river. You want the river to be more oligotrophic, okay? Because it has more oxygen availability, it supports more levels to the trophic structure. So you'll see oligotrophic versus eutrophic used. But that kind of moves past the fact that this is also a natural process. Over time, lakes accrue sediment, okay? Lakes get more plant growth going on. Lakes get more plant growth, they get more decomposition. And given enough time, most lakes will fill in and no longer be lakes, okay? Because they just keep accruing sediment from the shore. As you get closer to the surface, you get more plant growth. And the big thing is, as that plant matter decays and dies, you get all of this cellular respiration occurring via decomposition, all right? That's going to be consuming the oxygen within the body of water. So it gets oxygen depleted. I know that we talked very briefly about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And it was kind of like, why are we talking about this too much? And I went into too much detail. But there's one thing I want you to remember about respiration, right? Is that decomposition is respiration. Respiration consumes oxygen. It's super important. And it produces carbon dioxide, okay? It's really important to think about because it makes eutrophication sort of make a little bit more sense. So here's the thing. We've also got bad eutrophication, okay? So we use the same term, eutrophication, for human-caused eutrophication that can kill a lake before its time. Here's what happens. You have, usually it's attributed to agricultural activities, okay? But it can also be due to other industrial activities, okay? It can be due to outputs of sewage into a body of water, which has a lot of nutrients in it. Here's the thing, whatever causes it, you get an undue, unexpected, external nutrient load into the environment, where nutrients are just dumping into this environment. Excess nitrogen, excess phosphorus leads to excess plant growth or excess algal growth. You get these big algal blooms that can happen, and that carries out all this photosynthesis, and that's fine and good, right? We want more plants, okay? We want more plants growing because it's good, okay? But it's an overgeneralization. So the plants all grow, deplete the carbon dioxide. There's effects to pH as well, but let's stick to the photosynthesis and respiration piece, right? Plants all grow, deplete the carbon dioxide, the plants die, the dead matter falls to the bottom, decomposition depletes all the oxygen, boom, boom, boom. You get death of the different trophic levels, they fall to the bottom, they decay. Eventually you end up with all this bacterial activity, all this decomposition, and it's just too much for what oxygen is available within the lake, okay? And this can kill a lake. So you end up with a bunch of dead matter on the bottom. If you see like a really bad example of this, like pictures, it'll just be they'll just troll the bottom and get a bunch of dead fish out of there, and just everything's dead inside. There's no oxygen available inside of the body of water. So this is eutrophication, but it's not natural eutrophication, which includes, say, getting more sediment and everything moves up and there's less water overall. And, this is the natural lifespan of a lake. This happens before the natural lifespan of the lake is concluded, and now you got a big body of stagnant dead water, and that's worse. So both are called eutrophication, but one is just the natural end of a lake, and one is the result of dumping too many nutrients into it. Solid? They should call it putrefaction. Points. I'm giving you points for the wordplay. I love it. Those aren't like score points, though. Those are John points. They expire. But you know the whole system. Okay. I'm sorry. No. They have no value. Yeah. But you've got them. If that makes you feel better. I don't know. Wetlands. Let's talk about them. Sometimes it's fun to get some terminology trivia out of a class, where you can be like, well, that's not actually a swamp. That's actually a fen. Or that's actually a bog. I don't know. It's kind of cool. Wetlands. What are they? The land is wet. At least part of the year, the land is saturated or covered with water. So the soil's pore space is entirely filled with water. It's sort of an anoxic condition inside of the soil. There might be standing water on the top, or it might just be muck, Swamps and marshes. They're technically different things. A swamp has trees. A marsh does not have trees. That's kind of cool, right? That's kind of cool. Now, bogs and fens, okay? Bogs are characterized by getting a lot of moss growth going on there. One of the most important, a very important type of moss is peat moss, okay? Peat moss generates something called peat, which is basically a big mat of moss in different stages of decomposition. It's incredibly energy dense, all right? And it's really good at absorbing water. That's what it does. So it's mined for a soil amendment, and in some regions, it's actually just harvested and burned, okay? So peat, a bunch of decaying mosses and bryophytes, okay? So bogs get their water from precipitation, fens get their water from groundwater. But they're similar, okay? They're usually similar in their species composition. Cool so far? All right, now peat, like I said before, is regularly mined. The golf industry mines it. Peat bogs and fens are an endangered habitat type because peat is being drawn out of them. These also are regularly drained or filled or converted into land that's more useful in big quotes, right? Solid. Great. They hold a lot of carbon because decomposition rates are relatively low, okay? They have decently high productivity, but the soil's anoxic because it's always wet. So Decomposition is respiration. It requires oxygen, so you end up with all this carbon sequestered inside of the wetlands. And that's good. Cool? You dig it up, you mine it, you pull it apart, you get oxygen in there, you drain the moisture. Decomposition. Okay? Greenhouse gas emissions. The same story that I've been telling you over and over again. All right. Great. Solid. Yeah. Succession we've talked about. We're going to talk about it again. It's a core ecology concept. All right. Good deal. We got all these habitats that we've talked about. Okay, we got all these biomes that we've talked about. Biomes, habitat types. We're going to talk a lot about that in our biodiversity section because sometimes we'll teach it as two approaches to conservation. There's species conservation, and then there's habitat conservation. And, separating them is kind of entirely because of how the regulations work. You can determine that a habitat type is endangered and then get protections for that habitat type. Now, that's inherently going to protect the species that are in that habitat, right? Or you can have a species-focused conservation approach, right, where you say that species is endangered, we're going to protect that species, and that's inherently probably going to protect that habitat where the species thrives. So they're interconnected, but habitats versus species conservation is going to come up and be pretty darn important. Habitat loss, all right? Conversion of habitat to human use is the single largest cause of biodiversity loss in general because you're reducing habitat types. You're removing habitat types entirely, all right? We're going to talk about tundra and taiga later because these are traditionally underexploited, but exploitation of them is on the rise. So we're gonna, especially the taiga, all right? Lot of wood to harvest out of those biomes, out of those regions, those habitat types. So you know about this tropical, dry, temperate broadleaf forests. Okay, they're harvested from regularly. Okay, humans live there already. They're accessing those resources. They've been doing so for a long time, and we're getting better and better and better at pulling out more and more and more and more out of those areas. Okay? Wetlands get converted into agricultural land or land for living upon, and those are gone. All right? The regions that are harder to access, okay, have a large pool of undisturbed habitat. And the question is, are we going to start accessing that habitat or not? Okay, cool. Our big key concepts. What have we talked about? We've talked about how the physical environment influences large communities. All right? Terrestrial biomes, how do we talk about them? We define them with temperature and precipitation that determines the biome type, and then we further define them by the dominant terrestrial vegetation. What's the dominant plant type? The oak woodland, okay, is the classic example. Marine biological biomes, marine biological zones, biomes, okay? We talked about this. The old framework is looking at depth, okay? The depth of the ocean primarily, maybe light availability, all right? But now things are moving towards a biome definition based around gross primary productivity and substrate mobility. And it's been found that that model is better at predicting the biome types. So it's being used more. And then humans affect biome distributions. Solid. Okay. Great. I'll be honest, biomes are always a weird subject to go through. In some classes, you spend a whole week just memorizing biome types, and I don't know. It's always been difficult for me to just sit and memorize and rattle information off of a slide and be like, which one has the higher average precipitation? Answer the question. Here we go. We get to get now into some population biology stuff. Now, I like to use repetition because that's what's been shown to work in in getting concepts to stick in your brains. And I'm trying to be repetitive with concepts that other classes, future ESM classes, are going to either test you on aggressively or expect you to already know. And population biology, population ecology is a big one in that category, right? Other classes are going to be like, run these population projections, do this community ecology, do this population ecology, know what the different types of diversity measurements are, and you either have to learn them from scratch or your brain will have some of it already stuck. If you listen to my lecture on population biology, it's Friday. Are you all like kind of burned out on week 6? I'm kind of burned out right now. But that doesn't matter because we're about to talk about a really great topic, population biology. Okay, everybody loves it because it's where you get to talk about math and models, and that's what we're stoked about. Here we go. Population growth. There's 2 different ideas for population growth. There's the logistic model, okay? And then there's, I'm going to just offset this by a little bit, the geometric models, okay? And they can lead to the same predictions and the same shapes of lines, but one of them works continuously and one of them works in discrete time points. So some organisms reproduce continuously all the time, like cockroaches. They're always reproducing, right? And some organisms reproduce in a predictable seasonal way, like plants. They complete their life cycle once per season, and then they set seed, and the population grows again. So we use different models for different organisms, but for right now, we're going to look at, well, this standard issue equation, which deals with I don't want to misspeak. I'm trying to be very careful here because differentiating between these different types of growth curves is always difficult. So let's just look at this model and we'll look at its predictions and then we'll compare it to a slightly modified version of the model and compare the 2 predictions. I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself. Ready? Here we go. This is one equation for predicting population growth. The gold standard of the ecologist, what we want to be able to do is predict what a population is going to look like in the future, or what a community is going to look like in the future, or what temperatures are going to look like in the future. You want to be able to know what things are going to be like in the future so you can plan for it and you can, maybe make adjustments if needed. Great. So these sorts of equations take a current population size, all right, and they let us predict a future population size. So this n variable is the total number of all members of a single species living in a specific area at the same time. What does that mean? N is the population size, okay? N sub O right here is initial population size, and N sub T is population size at a future time point. Now, T is usually taught as if it means years, but depending on the species we're looking at, we might be modeling population growth at longer or shorter time frames. So if you're in bacteriology, N sub T, right, it could be a week later. It could be an hour later, okay? But the model's going to incorporate that. Anyway, N relates to population size, the number of individuals, okay? R tells you the growth rate, okay? And this lowercase r here is the max intrinsic growth rate. It's how rapidly the population can grow if nothing's limiting it, okay? If it has abundant resources and there's no competition, it will grow at this rate. And it's usually expressed as a per capita or a per individual growth rate. So think about this, right? If our T is a year and each individual makes 2 offspring on average in the course of a year, all right, then our R value would be a 2, and our T would represent years. Cool so far? Awesome, awesome. Raised to the power of T right here, that's the unit of time. So the cool thing is, right, our population's 100, okay? It's got an R value of 2. So next year, there's going to be 200 individuals. The year after that, there's going to be 400 individuals. The year after that, there will be 800 individuals. Solid? Okay. Now mathematically, we don't have to do that over and over again. If I'm saying like, hey, what's the population in 20 years? You don't have to go, okay, 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600. No. You can just plug this equation in and set T to 20. You raise the reproductive rate to the power of the number of time points. This kind of makes sense. I'm trying not to say years exclusively because it's not always years. Okay. I love it. I love it. Geometric rates of increase are meant to break down into specific points in time, okay? Whereas an exponential growth is meant to describe a constant increase in population, where you could predict the population at any given time along this line because they're constantly reproducing. It's a very weird distinction, and often the equations will lead to the same prediction, but it's a distinction that's important. Okay, here is an example of a geometric rate of increase. Let's go ahead and look at the equation to make sure everything makes sense. N sub t equals n sub o times r raised to the t. All right? So you've got 10 offspring for each adult roach every 3 months. So t is represents a 3-month period. Cool? Awesome. R, that was good. R is the, per capita growth rate. In the case of these cockroaches, it is 3 per individual. All right. Per every 3 months. Solid? All right, check it out. Start with 2 individuals, okay? At timestamp 1, okay? Very good. After 3 months, there will be 20 individuals. N sub t equals 2 times 10 raised to the 1. Cool so far? In 2 time points later, the population's 200. N sub t equals 2 times 10 raised to the 2, or 2 times 100, 200. See how the prediction works? All right? So you don't have to do every single prediction, because somebody might ask, how many roaches can you get in 2 years? And you don't want to have to do a whole table like this. You see the equation? You see how it kind of works and makes sense? Awesome. Now, exponential growth like this is not usually sustainable, because this model right here predicts, you could just say, oh, what's it going to look like in 1,000 years? In 1,000 years, or 4,000 3-month periods. And that number is going to be ridiculous. Okay? But that roach population is going to be constrained by space, predators, intra-specific competition, inter-specific competition, all of these things. Okay? So populations don't usually grow exponentially forever. So we attempt to control for that, all right, by incorporating a carrying capacity, something that we've already spoken about. So we're going to talk about carrying capacity in just a minute. Question?
So
This is a geometric rate because it's specific time stamps, right? It's 3-month periods. Yeah. The exponential equation. Yeah, essentially. Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. Cool. But the exponential growth equation gives us a different answer. It gives us an answer in the rate of change as opposed to an answer in a predicted population size, which seems like I'm splitting like splitting hairs, but no, it's very different. It's a very different value. Yeah, awesome. Okay, cool. Geometric rate of increase for specific time periods. The specific time period here being 3-month periods, 3-month blocks. It's useful when organisms reproduce in given times, especially if they reproduce in pulses. That's the word I'm looking for, like plants that reproduce in a seasonal pulse, okay? And also many animals. All right. So, cockroaches don't really breed like that, in that geometric rate, okay? It's not like every 3 months they all get together and make all their offspring and then they're done, you know? They're constantly reproducing. So we change the formula so that we get a change in population per change in time, okay? This is an exponential growth equation, but the variables are still pretty similar. So let's look at this same equation. This is geometric. I'll put geo right there. And this is exponential, okay? So dn, or delta n, you know, but I'll use the d because it's on the slide. dn over dt, all right, equals r times the population size. So you can look at the population at a given time and determine how much the population is going to change over each year, you know, month, 10-minute period. Check it out. So the population's growth rate's still the same. It's 3. All right. If the initial population size is 2, all right, then the difference in n over difference in t equals 6. Okay, per difference in t. So defining t is the complicated part in actually utilizing these equations, but this is giving us a rate of population change rather than a predicted number of individuals at a given future point. Now you could still multiply this number by the number of years, okay, and you could get the prediction, all right, or by the number of 3-month periods and get a prediction, but it's representing something different than the geometric increase, geometric growth. I don't know. The thing is, we've got these two like growth curves and these predictions, and they're all fine and dandy, but really, exponential growth has limits, and things don't work this way where it's infinitely growing to an infinitely growing population where it just keeps going until it's filled up the planet and it's extended to the edges of the atmosphere. Instead, okay, we utilize equations like this. So I'm kind of just trying to rush us into the actual useful equations, okay? That's a little bit, you know, a little bit simplistic, but I just want to get into the stuff that we actually use, you know? This is the groundwork, incorporating models into predicting population sizes. Okay, ready? More terminology coming your way. Some of it you've already seen. Carrying capacities, all right? How many individuals can be supported by the environment? How big can the population get? It's usually determined by intra-specific competition, because this model is only including a single species, okay? So this model only cares about moose right now. So it does not care about anything eating the moose. Cool? Cool? So the carrying capacity is determined by intraspecific competition, resource availability, okay? And that's about it. If you want to incorporate predators or interspecific competition, you have to add more variables to the model to incorporate those, to account for those. Okay, so keeping it simple, a population follows that sigmoidal curve, right, where it slowly grows, then it reaches its carrying capacity, and then it sort of fluctuates around its carrying capacity. So the population goes through these periods of, boom and bust, all right, where it goes past, then down, then up, then down, then up, then down, because there's these legs between reproduction and when the resource availability becomes an issue. You have all these offspring born, and the population gets really high, but there's not enough resources for all of them to survive, so the population dies back. This is important for allowing things like natural selection to operate more rapidly. That's pretty cool. That's something, okay? And it's just a natural course of populations. They fluctuate around their carrying capacity. So how do you determine the carrying capacity? Well, you go and you do a bunch of observations of the population, and you graph it and you see the point that the population size fluctuates around. Then you build the model to fit the actual observations. You adjust your variables. It's nothing too wild. So how do we incorporate carrying capacity mathematically? So check it out. This is still looking at changes in population over time. So it's going to give us a population change per each year, month, week, whatever our model determines. Okay? So it's a change in population size, not a direct prediction of the number of individuals. I just don't want you to get mixed up when you see the output of one of these and it says 1.6, and you're like, oh, there's going to be 1.6 individuals. It's like, no, what that's saying is there will be 1.6 times the current population 1t later. All right? Solid? Okay, check it out. So it's really a similar model, except it's got this K value. K being the carrying capacity. Really, it's the same as the exponential growth model, except with this new parenthetical, being 1 minus n, all right, over K. Okay? Cool. Now, what this is going to do is as the population gets higher and higher and higher, all right, this value in the parentheses is going to get, well, smaller and smaller and smaller. It can even become negative. There's another form of it used, which is n minus k, or k minus n, sorry, because if n is higher, it needs to become a negative. K minus n over k, all right, which shows that as you get a higher, it more clearly shows that as the population size gets closer to the carrying capacity, this whole term gets lower and lower and lower. And if the population exceeds the carrying capacity, this whole term can become a negative value, which means that your prediction for the change in population size is going to also become negative. All right, I prefer this form because it's more, it's more informative. Good. The logistic model of population growth. All right. Oh, sorry. Here it is. You've seen it before. It makes this prediction that the population will increase towards its carrying capacity and then level off there. Cool? Now the actual model here won't predict overshoots, and it won't predict a boom-bust cycle. What it will predict is that the population just reaches K, and then the population change becomes nothing. And the population just is stable at that level. So this is an example of a model being an oversimplification. Questions about any of these variables? Everything, the N, the K, the R, it's all good? Okay, great. So this is all about logistic population growth. Logistic population growth is what you most commonly actually see in populations. The logistic population growth model is right here, and the logistic population growth model is one that you should definitely be familiar with as you move on into your other ESM courses. So there it is, right there on the screen. And I think that's a fine place for us to stop today. And we'll come back to our discussion on Monday. Don't forget, at the end of next week, you've got a quiz on week 5 through 6. And don't forget to continue participating in those discussions. All right? And the annotated bibliography. It's still out there. 20 sources. If you can get like 3 or 4 done each week, then you can be done before the finals start to hit. Anyways, thank you all for making it. Have a great rest of your day. We got 24 slides. We can do it on Monday. We'll be fine. It'll be fine. And then we get into a really cool week 7 through 8 PowerPoint that I'm very excited about with all of you. All right, have a good weekend, everybody. See you later. Yeah.